From time to time I get asked how to lay up fiberglass over other products. So today we're going to have just a piece of MDF plywood or particle board, just something like that. We're going to show you how it is recommended that you lay fiberglass over it. This board is just a random size, but the corners are just straight 90s. We haven't done anything to those yet. And fiberglass needs to lay over that side. It needs to have a radius to roll over that, otherwise it wants to spring back open. So what we're going to do is we're going to router the edge of the plywood, then we're going to cut the fiberglass, and then we're going to laminate over that, and I'll show you how to do that. So hope this helps you in any projects you need. We are just using a roundover bit in a router. Preferably a 1/4 inch or bigger for what you're going to get that fiberglass to lay over. So now we'll router the edges of that. So now you can see we've got a nice radius on the edge of the part. That'll make it a lot easier for the fiberglass to roll over. But we also have a sharp corner here where it won't lay over right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a sander and sand that. Okay, I'm just using a regular dual action sander. They call it a DA. This has 36 grit on it. You could use 24 grit, or you could use the router, turn the router on its side and done it. We're going to do this by hand, so that way if a guy doesn't have a router, he can still roll that edge over with that. And all we're going to do now, I've got the edges all rounded over. Now I want to take the sander and just rough up the top of the raw plywood here, the OSB or masonite, whatever you're using. Sometimes at the factories they will actually put some kind of coating on there or light sealer or something. So we're just going to rough over this just so the resin penetrates that to get you a really good bond. Now we're going to take and blow off all the sawdust and get that out of there so it's got a good clean surface to bond. Alright, we've got it all blown off. Now there's several types of fiberglass that you can use. This glass here is called chopped strand mat. This is commonly used, it's easy to use, it lays over the sides very well. You can actually rip it. Like here on the corners, we're going to have this fold down like this. I've got this cut to size so where it's going to fold down over. This will fold down over, but right here it's going to want to mess up. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take this and just pull it apart right there in that corner so that way we can fold one side over and then fold the other and overlap it. So we'll do that on all the corners. This other type of glass is a woven roving stitch mat. There's chopped strand mat on one side and then woven roving on the other side, and then it's actually sewed together. So this doesn't rip. You can stretch it a little bit, but it's a little bit harder to work with, but it is a lot stronger. Then they also have another material. It's just the woven roving. It doesn't have this material on the other side. That is a lot more flexible in what you can do. So that's usually what you get at like the auto parts stores. That style and this style are available there. But for this application we're going to use this so we can show you, and actually we'll get the camera set up so you can actually see the air bubbles in this as we roll them out. You'll see them go away. So that's one of the things you're looking for. So now we're just going to go ahead and rip the other corners real quick. I like keeping this edge nice and straight so as it folds over, there's a lot less cleanup on the other side. If it's ripped and torn, then you've got a lot of extra grinding stuff on the other side. So we've got that all ready to go. Now we'll go over here and we'll show you how to mix up the resin. A common question is always, how much catalyst do I add to set it up right? and there's a lot of variables that apply to that. Temperature of the resin, temperature of what you're working on. The shop that I'm in, I usually keep it around 70 degrees. The chemists like it a little bit hotter, but I don't like to sweat when I work. So a good rule of thumb is for a quart of resin, if you have cc's, if you have something that measures cc's, 10 cc's per quart is 1%, 20 cc's per quart is 2%, and so on. Now we don't want to go over 3% because that makes the resin kick too quick. If you're bonding to something else, it can set up so fast that it won't actually have time to have a chemical reaction to bond to it. So you'll get a delamination later on. And they don't want you to go under 1% because then it may take too long for it to cure out. So as a good rule of thumb, I'm liking to stay in the area of 1.5 to 2%. So right now I've got a half a quart, and we're going to put in around 20 cc's of catalyst. So we're going to pour that in there, and we're going to stir that up real good. It's going to give us probably about 20 minutes of working time at least for the conditions that we're at today. So don't feel like you got to stir this real quick and get to work. It's better to spend a minute or two and really stir this stuff good. If you watch close, you'll actually see the resin change a slight color. It'll get just a little bit darker from the chemical reaction starting. So we got this stirred up real good. Scrape the sides, scrape off your stick, stir it some more. If you're doing a bigger area, have your glass already pre-cut and start on one side and mix up one, like a half a quart or a quart, and then wet that out and roll that, and then just keep working your way down. That way if this side starts to set up, you've got plenty of work time to get to the rest of it. So this small area, we're going to have plenty of time. But I always want to wet out the wood first. If you lay your fiberglass down, there's really nothing to hold it in place, so that helps that way. And plus, putting it in here, it actually allows the resin to penetrate into what you're laminating over, so you get a really good bond. I know it sounds weird, but if you took and put the fiberglass down and then put the resin on top of it, you would think gravity would work in your favor and pull the resin down through. It doesn't really work that way. You've really got to work the resin to get it down, because when you start rolling the fiberglass with the special roller that we use, it is actually designed to pull the resin up through it. So as we roll, you'll see the print of the glass, and then you'll actually see the resin get wet on the top surface. So it's really hard to push it down. So now I've got it all wet out all the way around. We're just going to take and line this up. And then we're going to wet it out. Now one thing you don't want to do is sit here and rub back and forth. This is loose fiber, so as you start rolling over it, you're actually going to pull some fibers out of it. So what I like to do is tilt my cup on the side and get some resin on the top, and then put it down, and then just kind of slowly drag it across. And then just keep going. Now you'll see that it actually, to start out, doesn't look like it's really wet, but the resin has to penetrate that fiberglass and make it rotten. So just be patient with it, wet it all out, and then maybe we can move the camera over top. But before we start rolling, we're actually going to show you what the air looks like underneath here, so you know what you're rolling to get out of there. They do sell fiberglass rollers that you can buy online. There's some places that you can go to get those. You could also use, if you're doing just a small little thing and don't want to invest a lot, you can just use a regular paint roller. Don't get a real thick nap, get the real shortest nap that you can, because that's going to soak up resin as well. So, but now we got that all wet out. And just see, this roughly here is probably like 13 by 16 or 18. I didn't use half of that resin, so that kind of can use as a gauge on how much resin you mix up. Okay, this is a fiberglass roller. It is just a grooved roller. It's got a little bunch of grooves in it, and we roll it back and forth over the fiberglass. It compresses the glass down, brings the resin up, and gets all your air pockets out. So bear with me here. I'm going to try and move the camera over to see. But you can see where it's got some white spots here, some darker here. There's a little bit more resin there. And this is still wet, but there's actually air bubbles there. So we're going to just start rolling over it. And you'll actually see how the resin comes to the top and gets all nice and shiny. And there's no air bubbles left. So you can see here where we got air bubbles, and this is not. So that's what you're wanting to do. Now if you get all those air bubbles out, you've got a good solid part when you're finished. You can also use a paintbrush and dab. It's just a lot more time consuming where you can sit here and go like this. But you know, deal with what you got and what you can use. But we're just gonna basically just roll from side to side. There's no rhyme or reason for this. It's basically you just want to get all the material down to the surface of what you're bonding to. So you can roll back and forth, you can change angles. Like I said, you've got plenty of work time. Roll this over the side here. Once it's wet, if you didn't quite rip far enough, you can take a pair of scissors and cut up past that and roll one side down, and then take the other one and roll over it. Pull one side back, get your other side rolled down, then roll your other side over top of it. And I do suggest that when you get done to go back and look over. Fiberglass has memory, and it's like bending a piece of steel. If you bend a piece of steel, it wants to bend back. Fiberglass is the same way. Even though it's wet and rotten, it still wants to spring back to its natural straight form. So don't just roll it around once and then walk away. Come back and roll it back on your edges to make sure it hangs down. The longer your sides are in the wood and stuff, the easier that will be. With this being so short, this is only like half inch thick. So it's wanting to spring up just a little bit on some of the corners, but this is just for demonstration so you see. But otherwise it's laying down really good. Some people don't have heated shops or garages to work in. If it's below, I'm going to say 55 or 60 degrees, you really need to warm it up somehow, whether it's a spotlight or putting a heat lamp on top of it. I'd recommend is heating it up just a little bit, not to where it's hot, but still where it's like a good 60, 70, 80 degrees. Anything faster than that or hotter than that is going to make it kick a little quick. And but once it starts to gel, like now if you touch it, it's all wet and all that. Come back in a half hour or so, and if it's starting to get a little sticky, then it's starting to gel up on you. After it sits in that stage for a little bit, I don't have an issue with you taking and putting a heat lamp or something on it to heat it up higher. and get that cure to go, because you do want it to cure out. So if it gets too cold, it will not finish out the cure. There's not enough thickness there to do that. But we'll let that dry. For cleanup, we're just using acetone, or you can use rubber gloves and stuff like that as well. But we're going to let that sit, and then we're going to come back, and if the guy was done with this, we'd trim off the bottom side and sand it down and start applying your paint or top coat, whatever you wanted to do. So you can actually see how it's got a wet shine to it. That's where the resin has came up. It's all nice, and do this where I can see without getting a glare. Got a nice even finish all the way around. There's no white pockets. That terrible shadow there. So, but you can see along the edge, we've got a nice good edge there. It is a little bit longer, but we can actually, as it starts to cure, we can actually take a razor knife, utility knife, and just slice right across the bottom of that and cut that off. But you want to wait till that's pretty hard to do that. If you cut it too soon, you're just going to create a lot of rips and tears and stuff like that. So this is the first step in laminating over. You can do this over regular fiberglass. So if you want to patch a boat, this is the same thing you would do to where I went in there and roughed the top of this with sandpaper. You want to do that the same with a boat. The gel coat, the top finish of the gel coat, it is fiberglass, but you've got to break that surface to get a good bond. So a lot of guys want to come in and just put a patch over it and pour a lot of resin and just work it out that way. You're adding a lot of weight and not getting any strength. So I do recommend that you sand whatever you're doing and then wipe it down with a solvent or blow it off and get all that dusting out of there, and before you start this process, because your base is the most critical. It is set up. It's good and solid. It's not completely hard yet, but we're just going to take a regular utility knife, and we're just going to slice it in here. Show you how to wet trim if you want to do that. This is called wet trimming. Basically, you just use that knife and slide it on the back edge of the part. And it's a lot easier to do that than to have to sit there and cut it or grind it. It's still a little tacky on the other side, but you can see we've got a good seal along in here. There's a couple of places like right over here where it rolled up a little bit. So you can see a little gap right in here. We can fill that with resin, or if we was going to do that on the other side, we would roll this edge over and lay another layer of glass over that. So it's still a little too soft to do anything with, so we're going to let that set up a little bit further.